Tonight, Sean Diddy Combs waits to hear if he'll walk free on bail. The hip-hop mogul has been acquitted of the most serious charges, which had threatened to put him behind bars for life.
How are the family feeling about the verdict?
After erupting in applause inside, Combs' family is tight-lipped while leaving court. Heated exchanges, though, between Diddy's supporters and critics as the lawyer for one of his accusers reacts to the mixed result.
We're pleased that he's finally been held responsible for 2 federal crimes, something that he's never faced in his life. He still faces substantial jail time.
The crimes that he has been convicted of relate to prostitution. We're live at the court in New York as the judge considers what happens next. As we explore the case that turned a music tycoon into an industry outcast. Also ahead tonight. Will Gaza get some respite from this? President Trump pushes for Israel and Hamas to get on board with a new ceasefire. Plus, England and Wales try to acclimatise to a sweltering Switzerland ahead of their first matches at the Euros. All that and more coming up on The World with me, Anna Botting. Hello, good evening. The verdicts are in. Now, Sean Diddy Combs has an hour or so to wait to find out if he'll walk out of court tonight after an overall win in his sensational trial. The multimillionaire rapper was found guilty of 2 of the 5 charges against him. Crucially, he was cleared of those that carried life sentences. He could still serve time, though. A judge will decide shortly if Diddy will get bail until he's sentenced. So let's take you through the verdicts then. It was on the 2 charges of transportation for prostitution that Diddy was found guilty. Each of those convictions carries a maximum jail sentence of 10 years. The 55-year-old was found not guilty of 2 charges of sex trafficking involving force, fraud or coercion. And he was also acquitted of the most serious charge, racketeering conspiracy, which generally refers to the activities of a criminal organisation. We begin with this report from our US correspondent, Martha Kellner, in New York. A warning that her report contains images of drugs and domestic violence.
Let Puffy go! Let Puffy go!
Outside court calls for the immediate release of the man formerly known as Puff Daddy.
Seems like yesterday we used to rock the show.
Sean Diddy Combs, a music mogul who became his own brand, began the day in prison. He was facing the possibility of spending the rest of his life there. He could end the day out of custody on house arrest.
Man, I'm so happy right now, man.
Celebrations among his supporters as he's cleared of the most serious criminal charges against him. Combs' former girlfriend Cassie Ventura has been the star witness. The prosecution said he forced her into partaking in so-called freak-offs, drug-fuelled sex sessions with male prostitutes, the threat of violence looming large. The jury watched this video of Combs beating Cassie viciously in a hotel corridor, but they found him not guilty of sex trafficking or racketeering. They did find him guilty of the lesser charges of transportation for prostitution, a consolation prize for her lawyer.
We're pleased that he's finally been held responsible for 2 federal crimes, something that he's never faced in his life. He still faces substantial jail time. Of course, we would have liked to have seen a conviction on the sex crimes.
Combs, though, as a first-time offender, is unlikely to face anything close to the maximum sentence of 10 years for his crimes. His defence team pushing the judge to release Combs from prison immediately. Sean Combs' children have been in court for the past 7 weeks, hearing graphic details of their father's sex life. Their support, though, has remained steadfast. Now they're waiting to learn if he'll be released from prison. As the verdict was read out, Diddy slid to his knees, clasping his chair. In the background, his lead defence lawyers hold each other tightly, a hard-fought victory for them. He sees this as a win.
He absolutely sees this as a win. And you see it in the body language and the way he's clapping with his children and the way that he will get a sentence where he can envision the day when he goes home to hug his children.
The verdict, say women's rights groups, is a setback for the Me Too movement, but Combs' defence maintained that his sexual relations had always been consensual.
This is your freedom here!
It's a case which has provoked passion on both sides. The sentencing is certain to inflame feelings even further.
We're live now to Martha outside the court in New York, and today's court hearing's not yet over, Martha. Is there still a chance Sean Combs could walk out of court today?
Yeah, that chance remains possible, Anna. The judge has set a deadline for 5 p.m, so around an hour from now, local time, for both the prosecution lawyers and the defence lawyers to submit their arguments to him as to what should happen next for Sean Combs. The defence team, Diddy's lead lawyer, Mark Agnifilo, has made it very clear that the defence will request that Sean Combs be released on bail. They have proposed that he will head to his luxury mansion in the resort town of Two-Star Island in Florida as he awaits sentencing on those 2 lesser charges of which he was convicted today. So they're calling for his immediate release from custody from the Metropolitan Detention Centre in Brooklyn, which is where he spent the last 10 months of his life awaiting trial, and then during the 7 weeks of the trial itself. It's very clear that the prosecution is going to ask that Sean Combs remain in prison. They say he still poses a risk to the public. They say he's still been found guilty of serious charges. Just to recap what he has been found guilty of, they were the 2 charges of transportation for prostitution. So this jury found that he had organised the transportation across state lines of male escorts, so male sex workers who were part of these sex performances, these sex marathons, which he termed freak-offs. So he was found guilty of 2 charges of transportation for prostitution. Each of those charges carries a maximum sentence of 10 years in prison, so it could be that the judge decides that those sentences should be served consecutively rather than concurrently. It is, though, unlikely he will receive anything like the maximum 10-year sentence for each count, simply because he is a first-time offender.
We've had a few hours to digest this now. So, Martha, what has the reaction been? There was difficult testimony to hear from a 9-month pregnant ex-girlfriend, countless staff recounting how they set up for these freak-offs, and Combs cleared on the most serious and, let's be honest, most complex charges against him.
Yeah, I think some people here, Anna, that I've been speaking to, women's rights advocates, certainly can't believe that P. Diddy, Sean Combs, has escaped the most serious charges in this case. They point out the weeks and weeks of very disturbing testimony that was heard inside this court, accounts of beatings which Sean Combs inflicted on both Cassie Ventura and the woman who testified as Jane, his most recent girlfriend. Even that video which you saw in my report there of him kicking and dragging Cassie in a hotel corridor. The accounts, obviously, of those freak-offs. Many people can't believe that he has escaped the most serious charges. On the other hand, there are plenty of supporters of Sean Combs outside this court who believed that the women, the other witnesses who testified in this case, were motivated by money. So, yeah, a divided opinion, certainly. But interestingly, there are calls from some of those who testified during this 7-week trial for the judge to keep Sean Combs in prison for now. We've received a statement from the lawyer for Cassie Ventura. He said Ms. Ventura believes that Mr. Combs is likely to pose a danger to the victims who testified in this case, including herself, as well as to the community. Similarly, a statement from a woman named Deontay Nash, a former stylist for Bad Boy Entertainment. She was a witness in this case as well, sent a letter to the court urging Judge Arun Subramanian not to release Combs, saying, "I feel compelled to be unequivocal about the danger he poses to the public and to the individuals who risked everything by coming forward." Mr. Combs has a long, well-documented history of violent, coercive and retaliatory behaviour. So there's plenty for the judge to weigh up as he decides whether to release Sean Combs on bail this afternoon. I do think it's unlikely that we will see him walking out of the front of this courthouse, simply because it is such a circus, Anna, outside here. Yes, dozens and dozens of mainstream media, if you like, but also hundreds of members of the public and influencers, people who have been live streaming on their mobile phones every minute of this trial. It would be pandemonium if Sean Combs walks out of this courthouse.
Martha, 50 minutes or so till that bail hearing starts. More from you, of course, throughout the evening. Well, here then is a closer look at how this legal saga unfolded. Legal proceedings against Diddy started when his ex-girlfriend, Cassie Ventura, filed a civil lawsuit in November 2023, alleging sexual abuse, trafficking and violence over the course of 10 years. This was settled the following day, but two other women soon filed sexual abuse lawsuits, which the rapper denied. In March 2024, Combs's properties were searched by the US Department of Homeland Security, with 1,000 bottles of baby oil among the items seized. 2 months later, footage showing Combs attacking Ventura in a hotel hallway was published by CNN. It mirrors an assault that Ventura alleged in her previous lawsuit. In September, Combs was arrested at the Park Hyatt Hotel in Manhattan with criminal charges announced the following day. Well, the hip-hop star pleaded not guilty and was denied bail. And over the course of the last 7 weeks, a New York jury has heard evidence including testimony of drug-fueled sex sessions called freak-offs. Diddy chose not to testify. Well, joining me now is criminal attorney Eric Faddis. Good to have you on. And certainly, as we were hearing from our correspondent, the evidence was graphic, distressing, and yet the jurors, having heard and indeed seen all the evidence, including the freak-off videos, which remain sealed, have acquitted on the more serious charges. What was your reaction then as you heard the verdicts?
You know, I was not terribly surprised. In the beginning of this case, there was a lot of hype, perhaps a lot of sensationalism, if you will. But then once we got into trial, you know, the government's presentation of evidence seemed somewhat underwhelming. It didn't really meet the expectations that they had set for the public and for this jury. And so ultimately, the jury only convicted on the least serious charges. Honestly, I kind of saw that coming.
So did the prosecution pick the wrong charges, do you think? Why not add domestic violence, for example? And the most serious, racketeering conspiracy, is that simply too complicated to prove for a jury? What do you need to show as a prosecutor?
That RICO charge is terribly complex. It was designed to go after like the mafia or street gangs. Here, the federal government used a creative application and tried to apply it to a business, Bad Boy Entertainment. But what they had to prove was that there was a criminal enterprise, multiple affiliates who had agreed with one another to engage in crime. Well, there hadn't been any co-conspirators charged, and the government didn't call as witnesses any of those primary affiliates. And so I think the jury was left wondering, hey, if this is a criminal enterprise, why is there only one alleged criminal, Diddy? And then on top of that, yes, there was certainly domestic violence, but that is usually a state charge. And I think the federal government wanted to bring the most serious charges they could, but perhaps they overplayed their hand a bit.
So he was found guilty on transportation for prostitution. What is that, and why is that illegal?
Yes, so that is essentially where someone transports a sex worker across state lines for the purposes of a commercial sex act. You know, on the state level, if it hadn't have been transporting across state lines, it would have been a state prostitution charge, which is a low-level misdemeanor. You bring in the interstate aspect of it, it elevates it to a federal offense. That being said, it's a less serious federal offense. It carries up to 10 years in prison, which is substantial. But I think that the judge is probably going to look to the lower end of that range.
And fundamentally, do you think the jurors based this on two elements? One, that possibly these relations were consensual. Cassie Ventura stayed with him for a decade. And secondly, that these were private activities and not a criminal enterprise.
That was certainly the defense's argument during closings. The defense tried to draw a separation between Diddy and his personal life and Bad Boy Entertainment, essentially arguing that hey, he may have engaged in some shady activities personally, but that doesn't necessarily implicate his business, much less some kind of criminal enterprise. On top of that, with the consent issue, there was conflicting evidence. Cassie and Jane did say that some of the romantic encounters were non-consensual, but there were a lot of text messages that were showing that a lot of the romantic encounters were consensual. And so I think perhaps those lines got blurred for the jury back there, and they just weren't persuaded to the standard required that this was a non-consensual type of affair.
Very interesting to have your thoughts, though. Eric Faddis, criminal attorney, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's take more of a look back then at Diddy's career. In 1993, Combs formed Bad Boy Records and signed the notorious Big, B.I.G., also known as Biggie Smalls. At that time, a thorny rivalry between East Coast rappers such as Biggie and West Coast rappers such as Tupac Shakur was developing. Well, the following year, Tupac survived a shooting in New York and accused Combs and Smalls of involvement. 2 years later, Tupac was shot dead in Las Vegas, where Biggie was murdered in 1997, and Combs, under the name Puff Daddy, released his debut album, No Way Out. It included the hit tribute song, I'll Be Missing You. 2 years later, Combs was charged with gun possession offences following a shooting at a Times Square nightclub where he was with his then-girlfriend, Jennifer Lopez. He was found not guilty on all 5 counts in a 2001 trial. After that, he announced he'd go by the name P. Diddy. The following year, he became a producer on the MTV talent show Making the Band, which signed successful groups to his Bad Boy Records. Cassie Ventura signed the record label in 2005. The pair would go on to form a sexual relationship in the following years. It was also around this time that he dropped the P from his stage name to just Diddy. Bad Boy Records continued to grow, signing artists such as Janelle Monáe and Machine Gun Kelly. And in 2017, Diddy topped the Forbes 100 list of highest-earning hip-hop figures, having made $130 million. Well, joining me now is Jason Rawls, a music producer, DJ, professor of hip-hop at Ohio State University. So hugely influential, perhaps, on hip-hop as a global phenomenon. Is it, do you think, tarnished by association with him now tonight?
I wouldn't necessarily say that it's totally tarnished. However, these are some very serious charges, and Diddy's path represents an exemplary hip hop success story. He's excelled in his craft. He's a master promoter, strategist, etc. However, we must remember that he's human. And, he's made some mistakes, and these will, I think, come back to haunt him. And it may be very difficult for him to revive his career if he is able to at all.
Well, genuinely, do you think that's a possibility?
Personally, I don't think so. Just knowing how, we have cancel culture, we have all these different things that are going on. These things all play a pivotal role in branding and your style as an artist. And I think these have seriously affected Diddy's opportunities in the future.
Well, take us back then. What was his influence on hip-hop? His discovery of now well-known names and indeed his personal rise to fame.
Definitely. I mean, he's undeniably a powerful and influential force within the hip hop industry, and honestly, the broader music landscape as well. As a creative visionary, he's played a pivotal role in launching the careers, as you mentioned earlier, of Biggie and Craig Mack and Mary J. Blige and others. And so, that is important to realize that he's a very integral part to the history of hip hop culture. However, at the same time, we must remember that his personal shortcomings should not be viewed as a representative of hip hop culture itself. And so we got to keep in mind that hip hop and the culture and the music industry in general is more complex and bigger than any one individual.
So when did it become apparent that there were issues here? Hedonistic, flamboyant, we've learnt tonight, go back to a luxury mansion if he's released on bail this evening. Were his parties contentious, controversial at the time?
They were controversial at the time. I remember hearing stories myself being in the industry. However, this is also a part of what does occur in the industry. I think that you could see outside looking in that there were issues and there were problems. However, who was going to stop them? What were people going to do with someone who has as much power and money as someone like Diddy?
Do you think he should feel shame after what the court has heard?
Personally, these are very shameful allegations. However, that's something that he will have to deal with as a person, as a man. When I think of all of this, I think about the culture of hip hop. And I think that's the most important thing to remember here, that we have to separate the individual from the culture that we engage in, this culture of hip hop.
Very good to have your thoughts. Dr. Jason Rule, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Well, you're watching The World with me, Anna Botting. Still to come, the questions that the Combs trial raises for an entire industry. And also ahead in the programme, the demands that for now stand in the way of a ceasefire for Gaza.
In February 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. Thousands of Russians were drafted. For some, the reality of frontline warfare meant one thing: desertion.
I had a rush of adrenaline. It was a kind of treason.
But they did not escape on their own.
I help people to desert Russian army.
The stakes are high, but for some, there's no other option.
We keep going till Putin's regime is over.
Escaping Putin on Sky News.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Turkey is burying its dead.
Whole families died in this collapse. Generations wiped out. I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
Anyone could say, I'll do that, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
Sky News. Get the full story first.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks.
If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach. This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
Well, welcome back. The verdicts may be in for Sean Diddy Combs, but will his downfall shift the music industry in the post-Me Too era? Let's bring in Mark Anthony Neal, Professor of African American Studies at Duke University, who runs a course on the history of hip-hop. Welcome to you. First a question about Sean Combs himself. Is this the end of P. Diddy, do you think, in the music world? And if so, are there broader implications?
It's been close to a decade since Mr. Combs has really been relevant in the music industry, either as an artist or as a producer or someone who could create new acts. So I think he was really on the last stages of this now. I mean, much of his reputation the last decade has come from him really being a brand ambassador for high-end products that were really far away from the kind of middle ground and status quo of what hip-hop and the record industry represented at the time.
So you're suggesting he's become a flamboyant celebrity rather than a musician, really?
Oh, there's no question about that. I think when you saw the uptick in streaming of his music when the trial first opened, that was more out of curiosity for a generation of folks who did not grow up listening to his music, didn't know it well, and wanted to make some sort of connection between who this man was and how he was being depicted and the kind of music he had made 20, 25 years ago.
Does hip-hop have a problem? Is there guilt by association now, do you think?
There's no question that hip-hop has dealt with, in many instances throughout its history, with issues of misogyny, sexual violence, patriarchy. But I'm also want to be clear that hip-hop is not an outlier in that regard. It is reflective of very such things, definitely in American society, in some ways embodied by the sitting American president at the moment. But I think, hip-hop for a long time has had writers and journalists who are very critical of the representation of women within hip-hop. And this is going back 30 years. I think this moment is a recognition of what we've seen play out in terms of Me Too, when real questions have been raised about relationships, professional actions, what goes on behind closed doors that never makes it, in terms of being a record or a music video, but relationships that were problematic.
Well, many people have said this is a step back for Me Too, and you have to rebuild from here. Women who laid very serious allegations, even if they were in private, intimate relations with Sean Combs for many years, they feel have not been heard. Is that how you see it?
There's no question. Even though he, is being ultimately, going to jail for a couple of the charges, this is not a victory at all for women who continue to have to struggle to represent the kind of violence that they face in these relationships, the ways in which they are coerced. All these things that we understand is such a burden of proof for women when they go into these judicial systems to talk about what happens to them. And again, a case like this only creates another context where, we talk about in this particular case 2 women, but there's so many other women who've come out. There'll be civil suits and things of that nature. But it does create a context in which women will be less willing to come out and talk about their own stories if ultimately they're not going to be believed, either in the courthouse and also in the court of public opinion, in the ways that many of them have been attacked on social media and what have you.
Well, we have a multi-millionaire, flamboyant, hedonistic hip-hop star who is, his lawyers admitted, would have pled guilty on charges of domestic violence. You run a course. What do young people that you speak to make of what they've seen over the last 7 weeks of testimony?
I think for many of them, it is representative of an older guard of hip-hop artists and figures. I think because of the ways that the younger generation talks about sexuality and gender, and that's not to say that misogyny and sexism and obviously sexual violence has gone away, but I think they do see a figure like Sean Combs as highly problematic. as they saw a few years ago, a figure like R. Kelly be equally problematic within the context of these conversations about sexual violence.
It raises a lot of issues and a lot of questions, doesn't it? And very good to have your thoughts on it. Mark Anthony Neal, Professor of African American Studies at Duke University. We thank you.
Thank you.
Well, coming up next on The World, are we any closer to a ceasefire in Gaza? Donald Trump urges both sides to accept a 60-day proposal.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Welcome back to The World. Turning to Gaza now and the new ceasefire push from Donald Trump before he has the Israeli Prime Minister back at the White House next week. The US President says he has the Israeli side all but on board with the idea of a 60-day truce. Hamas, meanwhile, says it's looking it over. Our security and defence analyst, Professor Michael Clark, looks at the questions and the sticking points.
The Israeli military has been increasing its military pressure on the Gaza Strip for the last few days and has moved into parts of the eastern part of Gaza City to Khan Yunis and into Rafah, and is clearly taking as much territory as it can under its control before maybe it's forced into a ceasefire next week. And the idea of a ceasefire next week, being driven from Washington, as we know, is being pushed by President Trump. So next week, Netanyahu, Israeli Prime Minister, goes to Washington. And a lot is clearly going on behind the scenes, both with the Israelis and through Qatar and Egypt with Hamas. And President Trump now thinks that he has a realistic prospect of producing a 60-day ceasefire, the terms of which we've seen before. Basically, the release of all hostages, the withdrawal of Israeli forces substantially from Gaza, and the beginnings of some sort of political process to talk about what comes next in Gaza. Well, there are a lot of details to work out. Would all the Israeli hostages be released? Would all Israeli troops withdraw from Gaza? When we think about Gaza, the Israelis have always said we have to keep some troops in the two vital corridors in Gaza. So the Philadelphia corridor in the south is really important to us because that's the border with Egypt, and we have to have control of that in order to make sure that stuff doesn't get smuggled through the tunnels. And we have to have control of the Netzarim corridor to actually control the difference between the north and the south of Gaza and what happens there. Meanwhile, the population have been pushed towards Al-Mawasi, this area down in the southwest of the whole strip. We don't know what the Israelis will say about the need for their troops to stay there, but they say that some will have to stay there. And even if they get those details sorted out and what happens to the humanitarian aid operation, which has reached ridiculous proportions in terms of its inability to feed the 2 million people in Gaza, even if they get to that, then Netanyahu has got real problems with his right-wingers in the cabinet. So Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bagel Smotrich are two ultimate right-wingers who say that they will not settle for any peace deal. They won't go for any ceasefire in Gaza because they think that Israel has got to maintain all of its positions. It's got to actually achieve all of its objectives in Gaza before they can stop fighting. And it's not clear if Netanyahu agreed to a 60-day ceasefire, whether these two members would stay in the cabinet and maintain the government. Netanyahu could probably just about carry on without them, but it would be very difficult, and this would become an immediate new political crisis for him within his own ruling coalition. Meanwhile, the IDF say that they've picked up a group of Iranian saboteurs or intelligence officers inside Syria. I mean, Iran, huge country, of course, operates its militias in Iraq and Syria, the groups that it sponsors. And the IRGC, the Iranian Republican Guard group, is still pretty active. And the IDF say that they've picked up individuals in Syria bent on something or other. We don't know where in Syria at the moment they were picked up or what the circumstances were, but it's entirely logical that they would be. The IRGC is still operating. They're still obviously trying to reconfigure themselves after the problems they suffered with all of the attacks of that 12-day, so-called 12-day war of Israel on Iran.
Professor Michael Clark there. So exhausted, under attack, hungry and starving, what hope do people have in Gaza that a ceasefire could actually happen and hold? I put that question to Dr. Mohammed Abu Makhaisib last night. He is a deputy medical coordinator with Médecins Sans Frontières, or Doctors Without Borders, in Gaza. Here's what he told me.
Hope is a fragile, really, word now in Gaza. I mean, what is really concerning everyone that if you are lucky to live one day more, that's the hope, I mean, in Gaza. So people really lost hope about ceasefire or about reaching an agreement. I mean, it's more than 630 days now of this war, continuous war, 24 hours, over 7 airstrikes, bombing, just destruction. I think people here, we reach, this time that hope is really, again, is a fragile word.
Dr. Mohammed Abu Makhaisib, MSF's Deputy Medical Coordinator in Palestine, speaking to me from Gaza last night. Well, Aaron David Miller is a former diplomat at the US State Department who advised on Arab-Israeli negotiations. He's now Senior Fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Good to see you there. All hope is lost. Does this refresh some element of it, do you think, this idea of a 60-day ceasefire?
I mean, I think there are two new factors here, which probably have created a better opportunity to conclude another interim exchange, hostages for a 2-month ceasefire. Number one is Benjamin Netanyahu's margin for maneuver in the wake of the successes the Israeli Defense Forces have had against Iran has buoyed the president's stock and given him a little greater I guess, running room to agree to another interim extension. The other new factor is President Trump, whose leverage over the prime minister has increased as a consequence. For the first time in decades, an American president has actually used America's operational military strikes against 3 Iranian nuclear facilities. So I think there's a reasonable chance of another interim exchange. But let me be very clear here. We are not talking about an end to the war in Gaza. That would require, from Hamas's point of view, ironclad assurances that if, in fact, all of the hostages are exchanged, roughly 10 would be remaining alive, exchanged in a second tranche, and the bodies of 10 additional hostages returned. The Israelis would need to end the war in Gaza and withdraw or redeploy Israeli forces. I see no possibility right now that either of those two things are possible. So yes, over the short term, maybe even within the next 10 days, another interim exchange. Sadly, horribly for the hostages and their families, and for the over 2 million Palestinians who are suffering in Gaza, that is not going to bring the relief that everyone needs.
Yes, I wrote the question, what impact will the weakening of Iran have? And in fact, the Pentagon has said tonight that Iran's nuclear program has been set back by 1 to 2 years. But what impact will the weakening of Hamas have? Isolated, clearly weakened. A Reuters report today suggesting Hamas is battling to survive now in Gaza. Short of commanders, their tunnel network decimated. They've got rebellious local clans. They are making their fighters work autonomously. You know, what is Hamas now? And who negotiates?
Hamas is now an insurgency. It's no longer a structured, organized military force capable of doing, again, what it did on October 7th. But let's be clear, it is the only Palestinian preeminent organization in Gaza that has any ideological or practical appeal. And herein lies the dilemma. The Israelis have made it unmistakably clear that if, in fact, the war is going to end and they are to redeploy their forces from Gaza, that Hamas's, its leadership will need to be offered safe passage out of Gaza. And number two, what remains of its military residual capacity, its rockets and its short-range weapons, will have to be demilitarized. And essentially, it would exist as a political organization, defanged. Frankly, right now, I see almost no chance of that happening. And Hamas will cling to the tools that it has. It's been hijacking humanitarian assistance and sold in order to recruit and pay for additional adherents. It still has the power of fear, less so perhaps now, over the local population. So Gaza is likely to remain a mess unless 3 basic questions are answered. Number one, who or what is going to govern Gaza? How will Israel's security requirements be necessitated without an indefinite Israeli military presence? And then third, who is going to pay for, and how do you begin the humanitarian surging and reconstruction assistance that's going to be required to essentially deal with an area twice the size of the District of Columbia, with one of the highest population densities in the world, that's essentially been destroyed.
Yes, and certainly we heard the NGOs and the charities yesterday saying that you cannot go from 400 distribution sites for aid down to 4. And we know that we've seen deaths there. Israel says it's looking into people being harmed. From your point of view, 24 years in the State Department, serving, 6 secretaries of state as an advisor on Arab-Israeli relations. By saying out loud the unthinkable, a Gaza without the Gazans, the Riviera plan, has that permanently changed the debate, do you think, and the future of what happens?
I mean, I think it's changed the debate among the Israeli right wing, who took that statement as a fantastical opening the door to what they really want.
But has it also changed America's attitude?
Well, now you get into the issue of a erratic American president who is situational and transactional, who frankly doesn't have the focus or the patience, at least demonstrated so far, to basically put his arms around the situation and begin to look for a rational set of elements that could, in fact, make Gaza a much better place. And that would mean restoration of legitimate Palestinian control. It would be pressuring the Israelis once their security requirements are taken care of, probably a Palestinian police force supplemented by boots on the ground by some Arab states, assuming the Hamas problem can be resolved. So again, I think the United States has extraordinary leverage. This region has now been scrambled in a way that is almost without precedent. But to trade and to turn Israel's escalation dominance and America's military power, to convert that into more practical, pragmatic arrangements, transactional accords, and even peace treaties and agreements will require the one thing this region has been lacking for quite some time, and that is leadership. Leaders who are masters of their politics, not prisoners of their ideologies. Leaders who care more about their respective constituents and their publics, their security, their prosperity, than hanging on to their seats. You don't have leaders like that. You don't have them anywhere. Not in Israel, not among Palestinians, in my judgment, not in Washington. And that, to me, is the greatest constraint about ending the horrors of the last 18 months. And perhaps, just perhaps, using that sort of trauma to create pathways to a better future. I wish it were so. It's very hard for me to see right now.
Well, Gaza destroyed, Hezbollah weakened, Syria's Assad gone, Iran's nuclear facilities bombed. The region has indeed been scrambled, as you put it. Erin, David Miller, really appreciate your thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Well, here MPs have voted to proscribe Palestine Action as a terrorist organisation, which will make it an offence to support the group. The move follows 2 planes being vandalised at RAF Bryce Norton on June the 20th, which Palestine Action claimed to have carried out. The prescription passed the Commons easily, is expected to be debated and voted on in the Lords tomorrow. Security Minister Dan Jarvis told MPs the group poses clear threats amid warnings about a chilling effect on the right to protest.
These prescriptions would not affect anyone's legitimate and lawful right to protest, whether that's about Palestine, Gaza, or anything else. The government has to take action when Palestine Action has orchestrated a nationwide campaign of property damage featuring attacks that have resulted in serious damage.
I understand what terrorism is. I was in London on the 7th of July in 2007. And I watched my community, this city, attacked by real terrorists. And at that point, rightly or wrongly, I decided I was going to Afghanistan to fight the terrorists. And I went because I love this country and I love our democracy and I want to see it protected. I think today's prescription order against Palestine Action undermines that.
Well, to the US now, where the family of one of 4 students stabbed to death as they slept in Idaho say the killer's decision to plead guilty has robbed them of justice. Brian Koberg had originally denied the charges, but changed his plea to avoid the death penalty. Our US correspondent David Blevins has more.
They were university students, living life to the full and documenting it online. Kaylee Gonsalves, her lifelong friend Madison Mogan, Zana Kernodle and her boyfriend Ethan Chapin were fatally stabbed while they slept. The manhunt led police to Brian Koberger, a former student of criminology, charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. Prosecutors were seeking the death penalty, but he's avoided that by changing his plea.
For the murder of Kaylee Gonsalves, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
The family of one of his victims wanted the death penalty, not 4 life sentences.
No, of course not. It's daycare. Prison is daycare, people.
Steve, if you could tell the judge one thing today, what would it be?
Do what's right. Do what you know. I mean, 4 people died in their sleep. You know, if we had 4 other people that weren't college students, this would be the death penalty.
In Moscow, Idaho, a quiet college town, they are still shattered by the brutal stabbings. But the families of some of the victims say the plea deal brings them healing.
we now embark on a new path. We turn from tragedy and mourning. We turn from darkness and uncertainty of the legal process to the light of the future. We have closure.
The plea bargain exposes fault lines between victims' rights and the American justice system. But ultimately, this is a case of 4 lost lives and one still unanswered question. Why? David Blevins, Sky News.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We'd been warned that we would meet people in the lowest moment of their lives.
Their story is one of fundamental American failure. Well, a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club, but I have to say there are more media here than there are supporters.
We love Trump!
I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too. This is just the audience that Joe Biden wanted.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
You know, it's easy to go to politics.
But it's important. It's at the heart of the issue.
For all the talk of a toned-down, humbled Trump, yes, maybe there was just a little less rhetoric, a little less divisiveness, but in the end it was the same rhythm, the same speech, the same man.
All them people that died in Russia and Ukraine, they'd still be alive today if Donald Trump was president.
If it was my wish, have a businessman that's strong like Trump, but maybe just doesn't say as much, you know?
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What we've been allowed to see over here is a humanitarian corridor. Free wherever you get your news.
A young American medical student is making remarkable things happen.
I've seen a lot of difficult things, and honestly, it breaks my heart. These children don't deserve that.
I don't think there's a single Arab I know who isn't seriously disturbed by what's going on.
And so they gathered for this wonder of nature.
I'm very excited right now.
This is an extraordinary moment beyond anything I could have expected. Sky News, get the full story first.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Turkey is burying its dead.
Whole families died in this collapse. Generations wiped out. I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
Anyone could say, I'll do that, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Well, welcome back. The countdown is over for this year's Women's Euros. The first games kicked off today, while England and Wales will start their campaigns on Saturday. But severe heat in Switzerland has fans and players worried, as our sports correspondent Rob Harris explains.
There's a real good vibe building across Switzerland as the European Championships are underway. Here in the fan zone in Zurich, fans have been packed in to watch the opening matches, and it all began with Finland beating Iceland 1-0 in the first match. The main challenge so far at the start of this Women's Euros really is the heat. Temperatures hitting 30 degrees, really sweltering conditions for the fans and particularly the players. The England-Wales players are now here. They're in training ahead of their opening matches on Saturday. I've been speaking to one of the rising stars of the England team, Aggie Beever-Jones. At 21, she's just won a treble domestically with Chelsea, and on her Wembley debut in May, she scored a hat-trick.
Playing for England, it's one of the greatest honours and something that I'll never ever take for granted. The last time the Euros was happening, I was there at the final at Wembley with my family, and now to be in this position is definitely a full circle moment for me.
Are you visualising picking up the trophy?
Of course, hopefully that's the aim and we'll get there, hopefully.
As for Wales, this is their first ever women's tournament that they've qualified for. Still a couple of days training for Wales and England before their opening matches. The fans are starting to gather here. The locals are getting excited. I've been speaking to some of them here.
So many people traveling here for this. Like, everybody's excited walking around the city. Like, there's just a sea of red everywhere.
45 years ago, I was playing football as well. But the president from FC Zurich, from the football club here from Zurich, he didn't want women playing football.
I remember watching the final of the last Euros in a bar in Barcelona, and there was not half as many people as there is even in here right now. And like, this is the first day. It's only going to get bigger.
Those fans amongst a record more than 600,000 who've bought tickets for this tournament, more than any previous women's Euros, including in England in 2022.
Rob Harris there. Well, that is it from our programme on the world tonight. Do stay with Sky News if you can. I'll be back in a few moments with Sky News at 10. Live to New York, Sean Diddy Combs waits to hear if he'll get bail. That decision, that bail hearing, due to start any moment.